Okay, we all back, we all recharged? Excellent stuff. So we've had two really good talks. I enjoyed both of them. We had one from Lee, and where's Lee gone? Lee's moved. There he is. And Lee said to me at the start, oh, I'm really nervous about this, but I think you'll agree. A fantastic talk, really interesting. And for me, I found when someone's talking about the stuff that they've been through, I found that really fascinating. I think as humans, that's how we learn from one another. I remember my granddad said to me once, do you know the difference between wisdom and knowledge? And I went, no. He smacked me around the back of the head and he went, you won't do that again. Mind you, I asked him once if there was a B and Q in Wigan. He said, W-I-G-A-N, no B, no Q. Thanks, Grandad. The point I was trying to make really badly was anyone can get up here and give a talk because if it's informative and if it's from the heart and if it's something we've experienced, we all find it interesting. So please, if you've got a story that you're sharing and if you're nervous about it, don't worry, we're a lovely, friendly bunch of people. We really won't take the piss, honest. And it's a nice, safe environment to do it, and you get feedback from your peers because we all come up to you afterwards and say, oh, I really love that story you told me. I really love that bit where you dealt with the really nasty boss. So it's a really good cathartic way of sharing, but also getting to network as well. Which brings me on to talking about feedback. Claire's got where's your feedback box, Claire? Claire's got the feedback box. Please feed the feedback box with feedback. We love your feedback. And I have a bunch of feedback from the last time round. I have to say, on the whole of it, most of it was positive. So all this is the positive stuff. But there's one question in there which said, why is every event in Manchester, given that the title of the organisation, association, this little consortium of ours is called the Northwest Tester Gathering, why Manchester? When I first set out the idea for having some sort of tester gathering up north, I was working in London 2 or 3 times a week. And I became part of something that became the London Tester Gathering. And we started off in a dingy little bar in Soho, and there was just a handful of us, and then from there it grew and grew. And when I last went about 3 years ago, there was about 150 members crammed into a much bigger bar. And I thought, this is brilliant, but we need to do this up north. And at the time, Simon Reiki and Martin Walton, who had worked with previously, were working at Late Rooms, and they were working with Tahira, and I reached out to them and said, we'd like to do something in Manchester. And they were like, yeah, it sounds interesting. And I was working over in Liverpool, so I thought, brilliant, we'll do something in Liverpool, we'll do something in Manchester. And we tried both. And really at the start, the only people who turned up was me, Martin, and Simon. And then Duncan appeared, and Duncan came along to a few. And we had a couple of events in Liverpool, but we just never gained the traction. We just didn't really get it off the ground in Liverpool. But we did get a few more people attending the Manchester one. And so we just put more effort into the Manchester one. Now that said, we do want to revive the Liverpool one because we know there's a lot of people who work in software in the Northwest. We know there's a lot of software testers in Liverpool who need our help and our love, basically, to tell them that we are appreciated, that testing software is a career aspiration. You know, it's not a stepping stone to becoming a BA or a PM or anything else. It is something that can be done in its own right. And so we are looking for volunteers and people to help us with the Liverpool events, should we call them. So if you want to get involved in any way, shape or form, again, please contact Claire Bow. She'll be more than happy. Claire Bow tweets sporadically on our behalf as well. So if you're not following us on Twitter, please follow us on Twitter. It's effectively our bat phone. That's how we can signal you all together in need of crisis, like we've run out of beer. And speaking of beer, of course, did I mention earlier that someone's sponsoring the bar afterwards? Yes, free drinks courtesy of tonight's sponsors, the lovely Amy from Rollian IT. Thank you very much. So after you've had enough of me dribbling on, we can all go across the road roughly to the bar, the bakery, and enjoy a lovely beverage on our tonight's sponsors who also provided the food and handmade cakes, Rollian IT. Thank you very much. Now that said, if you're sat in the audience and you're thinking, I'd like my name mentioned at one of these events, then again, contact Claire and tell her that you'd like to be a sponsor for an upcoming event. Okay, last session of the evening, they all sigh a great relief. I said originally we had 3 guys from the BBC who were going to be sharing with us. We've now only got 2 guys. But we're going to have a couple of Lightning talks. Lightning talks don't need presentations. They don't need gimmicks or anything. If you want to give a Lightning talk because you want to share something with us, but you don't think it's a good 40 minutes or 20-minute presentation, Lightning talk is absolutely ideal. Maybe it's something that you thought of when you've been networking in the kitchen during the break. Lightning talk is your opportunity really to basically stand up and say, I hate quality center, someone help me for God's sake, or whatever it is that you're struggling with. So without further ado, chaps from the BBC with their Lightning talk on fail.
Hello everyone, I'm Krishnan, working for BBC in Wetbutton Plus, formerly called as Connected Wetbutton, and I'm a developer in test. So my topic here today is failure is experience, and I'm going to share my experiences and the lessons we learned from the failure. So some of you might have heard or seen the Wetbutton Plus services. Some of you haven't. It's the Wetbutton Plus brings you the best of BBC Online and iPlayer straight to your living room. It brings the delight of traditional telly combined with the interactive internet. And you can press, if you've got a IPTV or if you've got a connected TV, you can press red and you can get some additional content of BBC News, Sport, CBBC and CBBS. So that's Wetbutton Plus services, and that's how the app looks. I've just taken a screenshot from the browser, so the actual app looks something like that. So we support RB, the Wetbutton Plus supports 50 devices, and we've got other apps like iPlayer, News and Sport within the RB Plus. And those apps individually supports more than 100 devices. So with those increased numbers of devices and browsers, testing has become really painful and sometimes really tricky. So I'm here today to talk about a bug which went live a few months before. So how did we miss the bug? The bug was actually, so we call, so this here is called the carousel, and that's called the promo panel. So when there are major events like Glastonbury, Wimbledon, or Grand Prix, we promote those events through the promo panel over there. So the developer made some CSS change and over the carousel, and he did not set the height. So he failed to set the height, which when the promo panel disappears, the entire carousel goes off screen. So how did we miss the bug? We're all testers, and we know how the app works, and sometimes it's easy to get carried away by the familiarity of the apps. And sometimes there are even chances we miss out trivial information that could cause a bug on live. We also had front-end automation, but it was particularly not helpful in this scenario because we use Ruby and Cucumber for our front-end automation. But those checks for elements in the DOM, in the domain object model. But in this scenario, if the element is present, the test gets passed. So even if the carousel goes off screen, the test still gets passed. So it wasn't particularly helpful in this scenario. Lessons we learned from the bug. So we do a lot of developer tester pairing whenever we write automation code. But it's always good to pair with developers. If you're really good at programming, it's always good to pair with developers to do. If the developers are making some CSS changes, it's always good to pair with the developers if you've got some programming experience. And if you're not an automation tester, if you're a manual tester, even then you can pair up with developers and show them how you test the app, how you do exploratory testing. You can have the developers by your side and you can show them how you test the app. And the next thing we learned was fresh pair of eyes. It's always good to have fresh pair of eyes. It's always, because you are so used to the app, you know how the app works, and you so get familiarized with the app, and sometimes you miss out this trivial information. So it's always good to have fresh pair of eyes. It's always, you can involve testers from others' team to have a look at your app. And then the last important thing is using the right tools for our testing. The thing we learned from that was we used Ruby and Cucumber, which wasn't quite useful in finding out the bug for our CSS changes, which went live, obviously. So the tooling which we used for testing the CSS wasn't particularly useful in the scenario. So then we came across this cool tool recently called Browser Sync. How many of you have heard about this tool? The one? It's a pretty cool tool. So we came across this tool recently. It's a time-saving synchronized cross-browser testing tool. So you just have to hook up your, if you've got a Mac or a desktop, you just hook up to your Mac and then connect multiple devices at once. So you make a CSS change. Immediately it gets reflected on multiple browsers without having to reload the browser. It's really cool. And it syncs instantly with all the devices. It's got multiple features like remote debugging, browser support, file syncs, etc. And setting up the browser sync tool is really easy. It's a module for Node.js, and you just have to type a command and npm install browser sync, and it gets installed on your machine. So it's really cool. I would advise you to try these ones. Yeah, that's it from me. Thanks a lot. If you got any questions?
Good evening. So I'm Dave Duke. I'm a developer in test for BBC iPlayer on TV. And this is about how I failed at regression testing and why we moved iPlayer on TV to a targeted exploratory regression testing model. That's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll explain it. So what do I do? So I'm a tester on iPlayer on TV. I'm one of the test leads. We rebuilt iPlayer from scratch, starting a couple of years ago. So iPlayer on TV is the games console, smart TV, set-top box version for all mobile complaints, CJ. So we used the BDD process. I couldn't agree more with the demonstration before. It was almost as if I could have written that. Your model of the hourglass, we came up with that in a meeting a couple of months ago, and I was terrified. I was like, I'm sure I've drawn that. So we ended up with over 1,000 scenarios when we went through our process. And here's how we used to do regression testing. So we used to run all the high priority features. So regression testing for us was choosing the scenarios that are high priority and running them. And this was a product we'd run from scratch. Our product owner was fairly new to product ownership. And everything was high priority. So regression testing was over 300 very granular scenarios. We built our regression testing pack from the scenarios that came out of the BDD process. I would not do that again. We ran those tests on approximately 20 devices, because when we first released, we released on about 20 devices. And we would always run them on each device, and we would run them on our test environment and our stage environment, even though they were identical. It took us a day and a half, 2 days per device. So even with 10 people, this was over 2 days of regression testing whenever we wanted to release. So the benefits of our process was that we had consistency. We knew we were running the same tests every time because they were heavily scripted. They were very prescriptive, so we could get non-testers to run them because they could just run through them. They knew what they were supposed to be. So we'd get BAs and developers and project managers to run them, which we needed to because they took so long and it was taking a chunk out of us getting to live. Device coverage was excellent. We knew we were covering every device, and that was brilliant as far as we were concerned. We wanted to get confidence this thing we were about to release was going to work. And then when we were doing the subsequent releases, that it was still working. The setup of the cycle was relatively cheap. It was easy to draw up the regression pack in the beginning. You just hit the button, you said, well, we want to run the same pack we ran last time, let's do that. And they were ready to fill in. The problems were that it took a long time to plan the regression cycle. As soon as we started thinking about, well, we maybe don't want to run all of them every time, and that was quite time consuming. It took too long to get live. Too long is defined by how long product wanted in comparison to how long it would take. So if they turned around and said, well, I think we can release, and we'd say, well, that's great. It'll be about 5 days before we go live, which wasn't kind of what they wanted. There were things that were never tested. So because we were running the same test pack every time, there were things we never touched because they just weren't in the pack. Increasing devices and increasing features meant increased time before releasing. So as we started to roll out some more devices, as we started to roll out more features, maintaining our desire to run on every device was very time consuming. So we ended up, we're currently on, it depends on who you ask, but we're on over 100 devices now. It depends on how you measure them. But we're on a lot of devices and we just couldn't, it just could not go on. This was us failing. Our product didn't want to release frequently because releasing was costly, because it took so long to get live. Because it took so long to get live and releasing was costly, we did it very infrequently, which meant we weren't sure, because we'd done so many changes, how dangerous it was going to be. So we wanted to do more testing. So it became worse and worse. Time-consuming regression cycles meant infrequent releases, and our releases were stressful. Our developers hated regression testing, and it made it take even longer. So we would ask everyone to help, but the regression testing meant they had to down tools on what they were good at, what they liked doing, and help run these regression tests. But they didn't like the test pack, so they'd find any other excuse to do something else. So what we found was they would just avoid it, making it take even longer. Generally, they believed they were testing things that just didn't need looking at. So this was one of the things we noticed, that they basically started to identify, we promise you there's no way that can have changed. Maybe we could not run 20 tests on it. Maybe we could run 2. So basically our failure was we just weren't releasing frequently enough, and we couldn't release smaller bits. So we changed our approach. It was gradual and it was a collaborative effort. And I'm going to talk about where we've got to, and there's kind of lots of steps that got us there. This approach, we got to it from project managers, developers, testers, product owners. This wasn't like test came in and went, we know how to change regression testing, because I don't actually think that would have worked. I think the reason it worked is because lots of different people said, maybe we should try this and maybe we should do this. So what we do now, we now do targeted regression testing using exploratory charters. So I'm going to split down kind of what this means. Apologies that this is a little bit longer than a Lightning, but I was told that'd be okay. So just start booing and I'll go away. Not yet though. So we identified approximately 30 different sections of the application, which allowed us to say, so instead of our 1,000 tests or 300 regression tests, let's just figure out the different bits of the app and then figure out some different priorities of tests. And let's get feedback from the whole team on the danger areas. So what have you done since the last time we released? How scared are you in each of these sections of the app? And this was the developers and the testers, generally the people who'd kind of had exposure, saying this bit's probably going to be a bit dangerous. Like, I've tested this, but I've just thought this might affect these things. You might want to look at those. And then we concentrated on those areas. Our targeted regression, as well as test scope, it was also device scope. So we were never going to be able to test on 140 devices each time. So product and testers now collaborate to decide on our device reach. And this is based on each time we release. We go, is this the right device? Are these the right devices to test on? Should we test on this one? This is based on business priority at the time. Have we just broken something for a manufacturer recently? Should we really make sure that it's definitely tight this time? It's based on reach, so the devices that are used the most, and it's based on technology differences. So if they're using different browsers, then we try and cover the different types of browsers. our exploratory charters, so we ran away from our given when then granular tests. And instead of using these, we use kind of more exploratory charters. Now I'm going to put these up, and I thought they were really kind of controversial, and Jit reckons they're not. So it's his fault if you're all like, they're not exploratory. So the one on the left was a test of us checking how to get, basically what we wanted to do was check that in the app, you go to the app and you say, I want to go to the A to Z, and through A to Z, I want to find a program to play, and I want to play that program. Our old pack, in order to do that very simple journey, you had to know which 4 or 5 tests you needed to pick out to build. So instead what we've got is just this kind of like, basically if you want to test A to Z, this is the one you want to test. This one on the right. And we think this is kind of better because it's generally a good story of where you want to get to. There's kind of room in it. Wait up, maybe it's not totally exploratory. It's quite leading in bits of it. And that's because we still have developers and BAs and managers who execute the tests sometimes. And if they've just checked that these things work, that's generally pretty good. Like, we're happy with that. Those wouldn't be the only people testing in a regression testing cycle. We'd have some good exploratory testers bashing away at it as well. And they would pick up the other things that are useful. It kind of gives you room for the exploratory stuff whilst also making sure that you're hitting the right bits. So we used a traffic light danger system when we were identifying the danger areas. Red is we've refactored the whole bit. Amber is I've changed a bit of this. And green is I've changed a tiny little bit of it. You probably don't need to look at it. And you probably don't need to look at it, as we all know, is still look at it. So it was decided to kind of move to this, and we're pretty happy with how this works. It means sometimes you test the same kind of things, and you know that it's a bit wider than it needs to be, but it gives us good kind of confidence that we're hitting it, and it's quick to bring them up. So we would have, for each section, we would have a red A to Z test, which will be kind of pretty detailed things. The ambers will be fairly detailed, and the greens will be like really simple, and you'd run your green, amber, and red tests. It means we can now run regression testing quicker. It allows us to target the areas that we think are risky, which we think is good. The problems with it are that it's got reduced consistency, so we don't always run the same pack every time. So it lacks consistency. Fortunately, our product owner's kind of okay with that, and we're okay with it because we kind of know what the benefits are. I'll move to the benefits next. We don't cover the whole app every time, but you never cover the whole app, so let's stop pretending. Because the tests are less prescriptive, not everyone is as thorough, so non-testers running exploratory testing is risky. We do, however, have some really good developers who are really good at testing, and we've got some other guys who are really good at testing who don't have test in their title. I would make sure that when we plan our resource for a regression testing cycle, if there's not a tester in the list, you go, there's a problem, we need to sort that. But it's a good idea to kind of get both on it. Just choosing the red, amber, green isn't very granular, which is true. Isn't targeted regression testing kind of missing the point? Some people would argue that the whole point of regression testing is that you don't know what could be affected. Obviously, there are a couple of high priority tests that we will always run, because there's a couple of things that even if the developers say, we promise you we haven't broken playback, we still want to check we haven't broken playback. Apologies. So we also know that device-specific issues that are very device-specific and only on one thing could lay hidden. But we're kind of moving fast and using our risk approach to go, this is the highest risk. We always test on a slow device. We always test on a device that we know is going to have problems. So it kind of allows us to mitigate these. The good bits is that we've got ever-changing coverage. Cover different routes through the app every time, obviously. We're releasing quicker, so product are happier, which is great. And we're happier because we're getting the stuff we're getting like the benefit to the users quicker. The cycle setup is quicker. I think I've covered that quite a lot. It's easier to say these are the things we want to test. It's quicker to run the tests because we're running fewer and because they're slightly easier to understand what's in them and what you're actually testing each time. And people like the tests now. And I don't know whether that's just because people like new stuff because the old stuff they didn't like because they just decided they didn't like it. But they seem to like the new tests more. We've generally found that non-testers like the new tests better than the scenarios, even though theoretically we all wrote the scenarios together. And we think this is just because it kind of just gives them an outline of what to do. So we think that's pretty good. So generally we failed because we weren't releasing quick enough, and now we think we've succeeded because we're releasing quicker. Anyone?